Yo, what is up everyone? Back here with another video. So in today's video, I'm going to be breaking down a lot of the top teams being used right now in competitive Pokemon, especially in Regulation G, and kind of what you want to be looking out for going into Indianapolis weekend. So I'm going to be kind of breaking down the top archetypes, going over the tournaments that recently happened, and kind of just taking you guys through which restrictors I think are best, and kind of what their quote-unquote best builds are right now, right? So we're going to start out, I'm going to go through the most recent 5 tournaments that have been on. There's also another tournament that happened on Wednesday, but I'm just going to focus on 5 to keep it a little streamlined. So the first tournament I want to focus on is the VGC Trainer School Open. So this tournament had about 390 players, obviously cut down towards the end because a lot of people dropped when they got out of cut contention. So it ended up being around 200 at the end on standings. However, it ended up being a tournament that had a lot of Swiss rounds, so it's pretty impactful along with VR, which I'm going to touch on in a second. Koraidon ended up winning the whole thing. So Michael Derbest has been running this Koraidon team for a little bit. Koraidon's been definitely one of the top restricteds that you see around happening on a lot of like tournaments. Koraidon has definitely been pretty successful. Along with that, you kind of see the usual suspects, which is Cali Shadow, Cali Ice, a couple of other restricteds running around as well. So right now there are definitely a couple of traditional builds for each Mon, but basically like the rule of thumb for any competitive person, if you're trying to build a competitive team or like be successful, typically right now your best bet is to go with something including Koraidon, Calyrex, Cali-Ice, sometimes Zamazenta, I think I said Cali Shadow, Cali Ice, Koraidon, Zamazenta, oh, and Terapagos. And also, what's the last one I'm thinking of? Kyogre, right? Those right now seem to be the top, like, Pokemon that you can use. There's obviously some other appearances that happen as well. So, for example, something like Wow Yang's team in number 5, which is basically a team where you have Zacian taking the place of the Steel on the Gouging Fire Howl stuff. So, stuff like that is fine. I definitely still recommend going with something that's a bit more standard, like with those other restricteds, but there are definitely some other builds with other restricteds you can go for. But for this video's case, I'm just going to be focusing a little bit more on the teams or the archetypes that are a bit more successful. So across the board, like, what do we notice, right? So in this tournament, obviously Koraidon takes the win. I'm second with Cali Shadow in this tournament. Then we have Terapagos and another Cali Shadow making up the top 4. And then we have in top 8 a little bit more variety with Zacian, then Koraidon, then Cali Shadow, and then Zamazenta. So quite a bit of variety. Interesting enough, Cali Ice did not top 8 this tournament, but as we've kind of progressed a couple more days in the format, people have been using Cali Ice a lot more. So if we go into the VR challenge, Cali Ice ended up winning the whole thing, so definitely not an irrelevant Pokemon. As well, too, I did want to highlight this because I don't specifically have the build open as like one of the builds I wanted to highlight, but I do think it's important enough to talk about. Miraidon is actually kind of relevant right now in the format. It's a pretty strong special attacker, and it gets access to really powerful specs attacks next to Furdraff, and it's actually really threatening, so it's definitely something I wanted to highlight because it's a Pokemon you'll probably see like running around. Miraidon Blood Moon Furdraff is something that's been being used for a little bit, and it's actually a really good core. Like, they work really well together, so it's definitely something to stay aware of. Also wanted to quickly highlight the Terapagos that runs a bit different than the other Pagos you'll usually see. OE used one with Specs Pagos, only with Sleep Talk as well. So really interesting moveset. Obviously lets it put pressure on in matchups, especially even when it gets put to sleep. It can just Sleep Talk and spam Starstorm. So pretty cool, but overall something that you'll probably not see as frequently as like maybe some of the other ones. And then notably as well here, there was another Cali team that finished in the top, or like in second place. That was a Citrus Bulky Calyrex with Mienshao. So Mienshao hasn't seen too much success, but it's been around. So seeing a team like this do pretty well, obviously, is a really interesting thing to note. Now, overall, would I expect to see something like this very frequently? No, but it's definitely worth highlighting because of that. So, kind of an interesting team. Not sure how much we'll see of it going forward, but, you know, obviously did well. So, this Cali Ice team that won is definitely one of the teams I wanted to highlight, specifically because Cali Ice right now is just incredibly powerful, has a lot of flexible tools. Definitely something you'll want to be respecting. Now, in the next couple tournaments, you'll notice that, like, for the most part, Cali Ice actually has a pretty big surge in popularity. So 2 Cali Ice is in top 4 here. This tournament I won with Cali Ice Bolt Balance, and then I play versus a Cali Ice in finals. And then you'll see the standard suspects, Terapagos, Koraidon, Miraidon, and Terapagos, right? So usually in the top 8, you'll get a bit of variety between like Zama or Miraidon or like one of the other restricteds. Typically, you'll always see a Cali Ice, and a Pagos in cut. and a Koraidon in cut. Those are usually the ones you see the most, and then after that, it kind of varies a little bit, right? So a lot of the new Pokemon, obviously, or I guess like a lot of the Gen 8 onward Pokemon as restricted to pop up. So then we go into the next tournament, which is the Floor Tour. This one happened, I believe, 2 or 3 days ago. Again, we have, Michael Derbest and me in the tournament again. We're kind of grinders, so we go through all these tournaments together. But Michael's team ends up winning it over me, of course. And then over here you could just see it's just a standard Koraidon 6 that's kind of running around. This is definitely a 6 I want to highlight, me using the standard Kali S balance. Then you have that Miraidon team that we actually discussed a little bit earlier, so that team is definitely relevant and around. You'll definitely see stuff like that around. And then Kali Ice, and then you'll see down here Kali Ice again, Rayquaza, so kind of that unique restricted slot that you usually see in cut. There were actually 2 Miraidons in cut. This was a really interesting 2-2-2 Dozo team. But basically the trend that you can see is that, Koraidon, Kali S, Kali Ice, and then usually one other filler is what you see dominate tournaments. And Pagos usually isn't always in cut, right? So continuing from there, right, you guys can kind of see very standard stuff across the board for the most part. And then going into the most recent one is Tommy Tuesday's practice tournament. This is not to gas myself up, I promise. I've just been grinding a lot of these limitless tours. I finished first with Kalias Balance, so Kalias Balance is definitely a team worth noting, which I already have it highlighted. Then we have 2 Kali Ices, actually 3 Kali Ices, so Kali Ice in finals, Kali Ice in top 4, Kali Ice in top 4, and then we have a Terapagos team, Kali Ice again, Terapagos again, Kali Shadow again, the balanced version, and then we have Kali Ice, Lugia, which is a bit weird, Miraidon, but basically you can see as the meta is shifting that there's a little bit more of an adaptation of these other restricteds that are kind of focusing a bit more around like the strong spread move damage, right? So, you have the Kali S, the Ice Rider, the Terapagos. Now, one thing that's interesting to note is that Miraidon has seemed like it's kind of had an uptick in usage as of late, so it's definitely something that you have to respect because it's definitely around. So I wouldn't be too surprised if we see some Miraidons do really well in Indianapolis. Again, like you'll notice though, the one that does well in this tournament is pretty much the same build that has been on a lot of teams. So typically whenever you see this, this is the main Miraidon team you're going to encounter when you're, competing in the tournament. So now to go through all the different teams and like kind of what they have as their sets, right? So the first team I'm going to talk about is the Kali S Rain team, because this is the very standard like Calyrex team right now. So the reason why they run Rain is because Rain is really good at beating Koraidon, and sometimes the Sun teams have like really nasty techs for Calyrex, along with the fact that like just having Weather gives you a secondary mode. So if you lead Urshifu Calyrex, you can Trick Room switch to Instant or switch to Amoonguss, or you can go for like switch to Pelipper and Surging Strikes, right? Having Terra Ghost makes you immune to Fake Out, so you can put a lot more pressure on versus the Fake Out cores. And then usually they alternate between Bolt and Gold. Gold is better in the mirror, and then Bolt is better versus like Kyogre, and Bolt is also better versus Kali Shadow in my opinion. So typically you kind of make a value pick with that slot, like what you want, right? I actually like Bolt a lot better because I feel like being able to beat, or like having a better matchup in the Kali Shadow, and then having better matchups across the board is usually like really nice, especially into Kyogre, as Kyogre is like kind of ticking up right now. But obviously like the version with Goldingo is pretty solid as well, so you kind of have some options there. I also made it Terra Water, but actually this should be Terra Grass. Terra Grass is the more common Terra right now because it blocks Spore from Amoonguss, which is Kalias's main problem in Trick Room, and you have Rain to offset the weakness of Grass. That being said, though, there is like some drawbacks to that. Usually when you turn into a Grass type, obviously you're not as good defensively, you're pressured by some attacks a bit more, so... Next up, Kali Shadow Balance. So this is a very common like build right now. Ignore the Blaze and Incineroar. That's supposed to be Intimidate. Actually, is this one Blaze? No, it's Intimidate. Okay, I literally only messed that up. Okay, no, I didn't mess that up on all of them. Some of them are Blaze. It doesn't matter. They're like, assume all Incineroars are Intimidate. But basically, like this build, very standard, just has like a lot of control over the pace of the game. You can do a lot of flexible plays with it, and you can obviously position your Urshifu, Incin, and Amoonguss really well to navigate around board states. As well, Calm Mind Bolt gives this team a secondary mode. I was the first one to really like use this 6 and kind of popularize it because I had spammed a bunch of tournaments, as you can see with it on Limitless. That being said, before this is kind of a just build up on the standard build of Kalias, which before this was Torn, Calyrex, Shadow, Rillaboom, Urshifu, Incin, Amoonguss, and I just changed the Tornadus for Bolt and changed around some of the sets to work a bit better for what I thought was stronger into the metagame, and obviously that had like a pretty big impact there. But yeah, so like obviously having made this team's pretty balanced. Like it's not anything crazy, right? Like I didn't sit in the builder and take forever to think of this. Like it is fire, water, grass. Like, but yeah, when this team was made, it's pretty much just has a lot of control over the game. What you do, and you have double fake out to help set up your Calyrex with plot. You have a double fake out to help set up your bolt with Calm Mind, and then you have Urshifu, which you can position next to it. So a lot of cool tools on this team, pretty well-rounded team, and yeah. As well, so Terapagos, so this is like kind of a more standard build of Pagos. Typically, like there are other builds like the spec set you saw, but Calm Mind is like the most default set you'll see. Typically, the items alternate between Covert Cloak, Leftovers, and Clear Amulet. People are still kind of deciding on which one is best for Pagos. One blocks Parting Shot, one blocks Fake Out, and one gets you residual recovery, right? As well too, typically they have Tornadus or some kind of like weather setter so they can deal with Koraidon, just because Koraidon's a really good check to Pagos in most instances. And then, you know, the standard Urshifu Rilla instance, so you can cycle around it, and then Amoonguss to support, right? Sometimes the Rillaboom slot gets subbed out for a bunch of different things. You could run something like Bolt, you could run something like other, you know, special attackers there. There's a ton of mons that you can utilize in that slot that can put on a lot of pressure. So I think that the Rillaboom slot is definitely the flex slot. Typically you will want like something there to help recover your Pagos, whether that's Pollen Puff Amoonguss or having the grassy terrain, or both, right? Kyogre. So Kyogre is a really solid pick right now, in my opinion. This version of the team that I'm showing you guys doesn't have any priority blocking, but I want to note that like a lot of Kyogre teams do include priority blocking. But this one is just a standard like Fire, Water, Grass with like Urshifu with Sash, and then Rillaboom and Sin. So this version is pretty strong just because you get a lot of pressure with your Sandsear Storms from your Landorus next to Kyogre that helps you deal with Bolt, and then Urshifu capitalizes off of the rain, so you can use the rain to get an even more powerful Surging Strikes with Tailwind, so you can kind of use as a late game sweeper, and then as well like Instant Rilla, standard enablers for a lot of the mons. Typically, you can see it for a draft subbed in for one of the slots. I've seen for a draft subbed in for the Urshifu slot. I've also seen Archaludon in a couple of these builds, and then also you can see Serena in a couple of these builds. So there's definitely a lot of variations. Actually, in Victory Road, there was a team that Stefan Mott used, which had a King Gambit Chien-Pao mode, but it was using the Urshifu, Kyogre, Torn, and Serena core. So there's a lot of different variations, but typically the main thing you're going to see is you're going to have a Pokemon like Kyogre, Torn. You're going to have a grass type, whatever grass type that is, something to deal with Raging Bolt, and then 2 fillers, right? And as well too, another thing I wanted to note, which I think is kind of important, is on a team like this, the Tornadus can run between Bleakwind and Hurricane, but I think Hurricane's actually a better meta call right now. Just because Hurricane's single target damage does a lot to AV Rillas and Amoongusses. So if you're running Tornadus, my suggestion would be to run Hurricane every single time. I think Hurricane's a little bit better right now. Next up, Koraidon. So this is a team that Michael Derbest has been using. Pretty strong. It's Speed Booster Wake, it's Speed Booster Flutter, and you basically Sun Spam next to Koraidon, and then you have Fur Draft to help you with the Kali Shadow matchup, along with AV Incin with Intimidate, and then you have the Amoonguss, which helps with your Kali Ice matchup. Overall, really solid team, has a lot of flexible options. The main thing that this team really likes to focus on is getting a lot of value out of its Photosynthesis attackers, along with leveraging how much damage Koraidon is doing. It's pretty much like the best version of Sun you can get in this format. I don't think that Groudon has particularly done a great job of competing with it, just because Groudon is a very it's a very slow Pokemon, so it can't get going as quickly, and it doesn't have tools to really pressure Calyrex immediately. And even though you could theoretically leverage it with Trick Room, having an inconsistent signature move really holds it back. So I'd expect to see more Koraidon if you're expecting Sun. And then finally, Zamazenta. So this isn't exactly the most standard build, but I wanted to just highlight some concepts on this team that I felt like were relevant for Zamazenta. Zamazenta almost always wants Pelipper because Zamazenta's biggest check is usually Koraidon. So Pelipper can obviously set the rain to kind of protect Zamazenta, and then you have a Scarf Shifu, which usually works next to it. It can be Ghost, it can be Grass, it can be Water, depending on what you want. As well, too, I think Raging Bolt's a phenomenal partner for Zamazenta just because of the way they synergize together. Bolt's weak to ice moves. It's also weak to, it's also weak to fairy type moves. Zamazenta has a neutrality into it, plus you have Amoonguss. And Zamazenta is a pretty fat Pokemon. It also resists ice moves, which is really nice. And then Pal with double dark moves. This is something that like people have been picking up on more recently. But POW with Double Dark next to Zamazenta, you can do stuff like throw chop and body press into a slot, and that actually puts on a ton of pressure because it's really hard for an opponent to switch into that. Even spinner and body press. So there's like a lot of cool things you can do with that kind of coverage. And it works really well together, right? Obviously, POW also works really well with Shifu, so you have another fighting type move next to a dark type coverage move if you're clicking throw chop close combat. So there's like a lot of cool things that a team like this can accomplish, and I do feel like these are definitely some concepts that you'll want to keep an eye out for, just because they're pretty strong. So yeah, overall, pretty good concept, pretty strong build. I think Zama's really good right now. The Iron Defense set's obviously really oppressive. Typically running Heavy Slam just because more base power into everything else you'd be hitting in the metagame. All the restricteds you're going to be body pressing into anyways. But yeah, I'd say pretty solid overall. Very consistent build for sure, and it's something that I think definitely deserves respect going into Indy. So that's pretty much it for all the teams I wanted to highlight today. I kind of just wanted to give you all an overview and a preview going into Indianapolis of like what teams you could expect, what are some of the common builds right now, and like maybe where, you know, some of the people's brains can be going in terms of like how they want to build. So I definitely think that Indianapolis is going to give us a great idea of like where the metagame's at. So obviously we'll be breaking that down once that's over. But thank you guys so much for all the support on the videos. Hopefully this was helpful for y'all. Let me know if I missed anything down below that y'all think I should have talked about. And, you know, let me know if there's any Pokemon or sleeper restricteds that you think are going to win that maybe I haven't mentioned. Thank you guys so much for all the support. Catch you guys later. Peace.